Hey guys, it's History Behind the Warrior and welcome to yet another Mortal Kombat video. Now in today's History of Breakdown and Analysis, I will be talking about a legend amongst the Edenian pantheon, the elemental god Blaze, pre-Mortal Kombat. Now in order for us to talk about Blaze, first we actually do have to go quite far back in time before the events of the first game and even the fall of Edenia. This of course does bring us up to roughly the dawn of time, just after the fall of the carnivorous grand deity, the One Being. Upon the One Being's defeat, his physical essence would be split across the universe, and these fragments would later grow and turn into what we all now know are the realms of the Mortal Kombat universe. One of these many different realms was of course the beautiful Edenia, described by many as a heaven amongst the mortal plane. But in order to maintain itself, the realm would be governed by an almighty god known as Argus. Appointed by the elder gods to oversee the realm, Argus did his utmost best to protect it, at least for a while. The god's own ambitions, lust and selfishness would eventually lead to the fall of this pantheon, as he turned his sights towards his own interests and desires, like for one, marrying the Edenian oracle Delia and siring two children with her, that being Taven and Dagon. Now the two were happily together, mind you, despite Argus's later adultery, and together they remained as a strong figure in the pantheon. However, their own personal business had caused them to withdraw from the mortal plane, having Edenia now be governed by its king and queen, Jared and Sindel. As the torch was somewhat passed from god to mortals, a very similar event was happening in Outworld, but in a far more sinister nature. The advisor and guardian of Outworld, Shao Kahn, had poisoned the Dragon King Onaga, in turn overthrowing his empire and become Outworld's new emperor. From here he would seek conquest across the realms in order to merge them with his own, in turn increasing his power to that of true godhood. But how exactly does this tie into Argus? And most importantly, Blaze? Well, as Shao waged a war across the realms in the form of Mortal Kombat, both Delia and Argus received horrific visions, nightmares if you will, of chaos across the realms. Whilst the tournament had been designed to restrain the fighters, somewhat containing their incredible power, the visions Argus and Delia received were ones where the tournament could no longer hold a restraint over the fighters, and thus a bloody war would begin to tear across all of the realms. Fearing what this might do to the fabric of reality itself, Argus would report these visions to the Elder Gods, who they themselves had also sensed the limitations of the tournament. They were somewhat limited with how they could interact with the mortal plane, and ultimately placed their faith in the Edenian god. At first, Argus believed that the only response should be total annihilation, but Delia didn't think that this was the right thing to do. The good came with the bad, and there were many fighting the good fight. So this is where the god devised the Pyramid of Argus. Placing the fate of the universe in his son's hands, he would let them choose the fate and future of this battle, but not without proving their worth. Argus decided to make this a somewhat quest for the two brothers. The sons would have to prove themselves by acquiring a number of different ancient Edenian items, and by doing so, it would allow them to travel to the top of the pyramid and battle the fire elemental known as Blaze, and by doing so, absorb his incredible godlike power. But who was Blaze? Well, whilst Argus was creating the pyramid, Delia was creating a being of incredible power, one that did rival the strength of the gods. But Blaze wasn't created to stop them. Instead, he was an elemental entrusted with the duty and task to make sure that the Pyramid of Argus would arise when the realms were on the brink of destruction. He knew from the very day he was created that it was his destiny to die. As you see, upon his demise, the victor would be imbued with his incredible strength and in turn create hopefully a better future. Knowing that his end would be for the greater good, he was more than willing to die for a better future. But of course, this is not something he would simply fold over and allow. Taven and Dagon would need to prove themselves in combat if they were truly worthy of his godhood. After taking on the assignment of the gods, Blaze would begin to travel across the realms, watching, observing and planning preparing for when he felt the realms were ready for the rise of the pyramid. Although gone from the pantheon, Blaze would in fact be mentally linked to the brothers' guardian dragons, allowing them to awaken the brothers for their destiny when it was time. From this point onwards, Blaze more or less does play a very passive role in the universe, only observing and watching closely to ultimately determine when it was time. That's not to say, however, that it was smooth sails for the Guardian, as he can be seen in Mortal Kombat 2 battling the likes of Hornbuckle. Now, whilst this may be a little bit of an Easter egg, it does somewhat indicate that whilst he hasn't directly been involved with the conflicts of the main line of games, he has been around and he has been biding his time. It's during the 3D era of the series where Blaze begins to play more of an active role and does make his presence known. So this brings us up to his debut game, Mortal Kombat Deadly Alliance. Now, between the events of Mortal Kombat 2 and Deadly Alliance, Blaze is diverted off his quest, much so against his will. You see, during his exploration of the realms, the Elemental had unfortunately come across what would be known as the Cult of Onaga. The cult was a group of outworld priest fanatics that worshipped the power of the deceased Dragon King. They truly believed that he would be reborn and bring forth a new age for Outworld, and unfortunately for Blaze, he was required for such a ritual. Using incredibly powerful incantations and spells, Blaze would be forcibly bound to what would be known as the Lava Shrine, acting as a bodyguard and guardian to this secret underground area in the Outworld, as this facility housed the very last Dragon Egg. It was seen as a sacred item by the cult, and they believed that it housed the very essence and soul of the fallen Onaga, something that would come to fruition at the end of Deadly Alliance. Enslaved under the cult's will, Blaze had lost all contact with the outside world, and because of this, the years would quickly pass by. That is, until Reptile entered the facility. You see, the Saurian had been manipulated by the vampire Nitara to obtain an orb that would restore her home of Eternus. Upon doing so, he would be left stranded in the chamber until he approached the Dragon Egg. Being seen as a worthy vessel by the soul of Onaga, the Dragon King would use Reptile's body to be reborn, and this in turn would allow Onaga to walk once more and free Blaze of his restraints. Mortal Kombat Deception. Following his release of the cult's grasp, Blaze was both shocked and perplexed with the world he had awoken to. Not only had the combatants of each realm grown too powerful to be bound by the tournament, but there was so many now that could contest the powers of a god. Instances such as Liu Kang's defeat of Shao Kahn and Shinnok, and most recently Shujinko's defeat of the Dragon King Onaga, made Blaze quickly realize that he may have been too late to the draw, and thus he instantly invoked the will of the gods, beginning the tick down on Armageddon. He would first start by awakening Taven and Dagon, but things did not go quite as planned. Although he was able to contact Orin and in turn awaken Taven, he wasn't so successful with Cairo, and Blaze very quickly learnt that not only had Dagon been awoken before his time, but he had been corrupted by some unknown dark source resonating from the Netherrealm. It's also around this time, following the defeat of Onaga, where he reveals the details of the Battle of Armageddon to Princess Kitana, who is understandably heartbroken that there is still more blood to be shed. So this brings us on to our next game, Mortal Kombat Armageddon. Although Blaze tried to find the source of the evil, he was ultimately unsuccessful in finding the culprit. Knowing that he was fighting against the clock, Blaze quickly turned his eyes back towards his quest, teleporting before Taven and Dagon and alerting the two of their tainted fates. How outside interference had deterred them from saving all of reality. Noting that they are running out of time, the trio are teleported to the very top of the pyramid, and the two brothers are forced to battle each other as they need a victor to vanquish Blaze. As this battle goes on, the Pyramid of Argus arises, and the Battle of Armageddon begins, with warriors of both light and darkness fighting each other, because at this point in time, both sides know about the power of Blaze, and ultimately seek it in order to warp reality to their will. But in the end, there could only be one victor. As this battle battle roared. Taven was forced to defeat and kill his brother Dagon, which understandably filled him with remorse and heartache. He knew that he needed to follow through in his deed, and thus would curse at the heavens before proceeding to his final battle, but no one could have anticipated what came next. Whilst the details are extremely hazy, we learn at the beginning of Mortal Kombat 9 that Taven had failed in fulfilling his quest, and it was not him that vanquished and absorbed the power of Blaze, but instead Outworld's Emperor, Shao Kahn. Upon killing the elemental and absorbing his power, Shao is able to bring on true Armageddon, and in a way, fulfill Argus's dream. But of course, it is in a far more perverse way than what the Edenian god could have ever imagined. From here, Shao wins, and Blaze's demise ultimately leads to the end of all. Now, typically this is where I do wrap up the video, but I actually wanted to go in on a little more depth of what happened at the end of Armageddon between Blaze, Taven and Shao Kahn, as it is pretty convoluted, so hopefully this brings some clarity to the situation. Now, originally during the midway era of Mortal Kombat games, it was 100% pretty much confirmed that it was Taven that was destined to win this battle and invoke a new era for the series. But when the studio filed for bankruptcy, all work on the Mortal Kombat franchise had stopped, being left dead in the water. As assets were sold off, the series would fall into the hands of Warner Brothers, who would purchase the license and breathe new life into it. Upon doing so, the midway Mortal Kombat team would now be labeled as NetherRealm Studios, and would create what would be known as Mortal Kombat 9, a game that serves as both a continuation from Armageddon and reboot of the franchise. Of course, the biggest change here is the ending of Armageddon, which has Shao Kahn obtaining the power of Blaze instead of Taven. Now, this was obviously done to reintroduce the series to a new generation of fans. What's very interesting here is that despite the retcon, both are actually canon in the lore now. You see, with Mortal Kombat 11, it introduces the idea of multiple timelines and somewhat parallel continuities. Armageddon's true ending still does technically exist. It's just sadly not a continuity that we follow, as what we get in Mortal Kombat 9 could be seen as an alternate ending of what has led up to where we are now, and in turn the introduction of multiple continuities. So it allows both continuities to exist, but flow on two different timelines. An interesting sneak peek at this concept was pretty early on, in Kitana's ending of Mortal Kombat X, where he slays the omnipotent Shao Kahn. But of course, this is simply something that's just teased at. Now, with that said, that has been it for the history of Blaze. I hope you have enjoyed this, and I do somewhat apologize for deviating away at the end here, but I wanted to give you all some clarity on Blaze's ultimate demise at the end of Armageddon, as a lot of people actually forget and undermine just how integral he is to the series. His creation means a lot to the fate of the 3D era, and he is kind of key to the reboot of the franchise, as his death really does invoke the start of the reboot. It's a pretty interesting analysis of the character's background and what does he mean to the series as a whole. I would actually like to see Blaze return in some way, shape and form, but unfortunately, much like the Sons of Argus, I do fear his time has passed by. But anyway guys, that more or less does wrap up everything I did wish to say here. I hope you have enjoyed this video and learnt more by doing so. Also, just a heads up, I do want to say once again, thank you for all the love and support. It's been absolutely crazy. So thank you once again for supporting all of my content over the last few weeks. It's been phenomenal and there's plenty more on the way. And with that being said, I do have the history of Kintaro planned for next week. Now, here's a question for all of you, and that is, what are your thoughts on Blaze? Would you ever like to see him return, or possibly the Sons of Argus? Please do comment down below. But until then, that has been it for me. So now, as always guys, before this video wraps up, if possible, let's try getting it to about 500 likes, and please do tick that bell, as it will keep you up to date with all of my content. But for now, as always, please comment, like, subscribe and share this video with everyone you know. Please take care, and I'll see you all next time.